Sukoigar Nervad, I am Tad Larkin, the lore master of Manda-LORE, and today I'll be digging through the archives to continue elaborating on the history of the galaxy. Where we last left off in this lecture series, we saw the conglomeration of the wealthiest and most powerful worlds in the galactic core into a single democratic government, the Galactic Republic. We then subsequently looked back on the Republic's exponential expansion and internal conflicts, the Jedi Order's many schisms, the Hutt Empire's fracturing and reformation, and the exile of the Dark Jedi to Korriban, where they enthralled the native Sith species and laid the groundwork for the Sith Empire and the Order of the Sith Lords. Just before we ended the last transmission, the siblings Gav and Jory Daragon, two down-on-their-luck Republic explorers from the Koros system, stumbled upon the Sith homeworld of Korriban, which had no contact with the outside galaxy since the arrival of the Dark Jedi exiles 2,000 years earlier. Upon landing on the world, Gav and Jory eagerly proclaimed themselves to the native Sith, with promises of lucrative free trade with the prosperous Galactic Republic. Their Sith audience, however, received them with less welcome, and the Daragons were taken captive and transported to the Imperial capital on Ziost. Following the recent death of the Dark Lord Marka Ragnos, the two chief candidates for the next Dark Lord of the Sith and ruler of the Sith Empire, Naga Sadow and Ludo Kresh, debated heavily on what was to be done with the new arrivals. Kresh believed these explorers to be a threat to the Sith Empire, and that they signaled an imminent invasion by the Republic, while Naga Sadow viewed them as useful tools to locate this Republic and conquer it in the glorious name of the Sith. However, Kresh won in the end, and it was decided that Gav and Jory would be put to death. Naga Sadow used this opportunity to his advantage, and with the help of his specially bred Massassi warriors, he sprang Gav and Jory from captivity, and planted evidence pointing to a Republic raid extracting the Daragons, which he then used to gather support for a preemptive strike against the Republic and rally the Sith behind his leadership. However, there was a catch. Sadow continued to hold Gav in his personal captivity, but allowed Jory to escape after planting a homing beacon on her ship, which would in turn lead him to the heart of Republic space. With the newly bestowed title of Dark Lord of the Sith, Naga Sadow gathered a massive fleet and jumped to the Koros system, where he battered their beleaguered forces that had just recovered from a war that unified the 7 worlds of the system. Empress Teta fought valiantly to defend her newly unified Koros system. However, the Sith fleet proved too powerful, and all 7 worlds fell to Naga Sadow's forces. With the fall of the Koros system, the conflict that would become known as the Great Hyperspace War was now in full swing, as Sadow led attacks on Phorost, Caecilius, Metellos, Basilisk, and was even audacious enough to attack the Republic's capital at Coruscant. At the Battle of Coruscant, the situation seemed hopeless. However, the resolve of the Jedi Knights turned the tide of the battle, and the Republic was able to hold its capital. This marked a turning point in the war, and 2 subsequent Republic victories at Kirik and Thokos managed to halt the Sith momentum. Republic counter-assaults launched from Anaxis drove Sadow and the remainder of his forces to the red giant star Primus Golud, where, as the battle raged, he was betrayed by Gav Daragon, who he had manipulated into becoming one of his servants. Utterly defeated, Sadow pulled his greatly reduced fleet out of the core and fled back to Korriban. Upon returning to Korriban, Ludo Kresh awaited him with his own fleet in orbit, and fired upon Sadow's heavily damaged fleet, that was soon sandwiched between them and the pursuing Republic fleet that had just entered the system. In the chaos of this 3-way battle over Korriban, Sadow took a small contingent of Massassi warriors and fled to the 4th moon of Yavin, where his Massassi built great temples and entombed his flagship. Naga Sadow then put himself in suspended animation, hoping for a time when he could be awakened to guide a new generation of Sith Lords to bring about the next Sith Golden Age. Meanwhile, back in Sith space, Supreme Chancellor Poltimo ordered unrestricted warfare against the Sith, and Republic forces massacred many Sith throughout their holdings, cleansing what was once Sith space. Unbeknownst to the Republic, Tenebrae, also known as Vitiate, former apprentice to Marka Ragnos, who sat and bided his time while Ludo Kresh and Naga Sadow squabbled over the throne, led secret remnants of the Sith into wild space, eventually settling Dromund Kaas after 2 decades. Through Vitiate, the Sith Empire would live on and lick its wounds, while the Republic went on believing that they had wiped the Sith from the galaxy. You see, Tenebrae was different from other Sith of the time. Immensely powerful, he was also quite selfish. He wanted to rule, not just the Sith, but the whole galaxy himself, forever. And he would achieve this through an extremely difficult and secretive Sith technique known as essence transfer, discovered and perfected by Darth Onderon generations earlier. He would use essence transfer to prolong his life well beyond typical Sith lifespan, until he could find something more permanent. He'd also use it to establish contingencies. While Tenebrae oversaw the rebuilding of the Sith Empire as Emperor Vitiate, he would also inhabit another body, a human named Valkorion, with whom he'd construct another empire deep in wild space, so that if the reconstituted Sith Empire failed to bring the galaxy to its knees, perhaps the eternal Empire of Zakuul might. In another instance of Sith survival, one Sith ship escaping from Republic persecution crash-landed on a remote planet called Kresh, and this small community of Sith would remain out of contact with the rest of the galaxy until 41 years after the Battle of Yavin. In 4800 BBY, Rill was discovered on the half-desert, half-frozen world of Ryloth, where the spice would be used in a number of medicines and hallucinogenic drugs. The spice would also spark the horrific Gank massacres, which lasted until 4775 BBY. 4,500 years before the Battle of Yavin, on the Outer Rim world of Barab I, the native Barabels became embroiled in a brutal civil war, which was resolved by Jedi intervention, instilling within the Barabel culture an immense respect and admiration for Jedi. Around 4400 BBY, Freedon Nadd, a young Jedi Padawan who had recently been denied knighthood, killed his master in a fit of rage, and sought refuge on the yet undiscovered moon of Yavin 4. There he encountered Naga Sadow, who had been preserved in the chambers beneath the Massassi temples for the last 600 years. Sadow tutored Freedon Nadd in the ways of the dark side, and eventually his powers became so great that he was able to overcome and vanquish Naga Sadow, and from there, he used his newfound power to exact his will on the people of Onderon, setting himself up as the de facto ruler of the planet. Nadd would make one decision that would come back to haunt him, however, when he exiled his rivals and other undesirables from the walled capital city of Iziz, after which, while surviving in the wild, they managed to learn to domesticate monstrous beasts that had plagued the citizens of Onderon and used them as war mounts to launch a rebellion against Freedon Nadd's rule. This civil war of sorts, called the Beast Wars, would last for centuries after Freedon Nadd's death, leaving his descendants, who were also imbued with the power of the dark side, to contend with the Beast Riders. In 4200 BBY, the seemingly unimportant desert world of Tatooine is settled by miners and prospectors, who would establish the settlement of Anchorhead. The Hapes cluster is also discovered at this point, being populated by a group of pirates called the Lorel Raiders, who learned to navigate the hazardous transitory mists, and would later become the ancestors to the modern Hapan aristocracy. 4,166 years before the Battle of Yavin, the Republic made contact with the Mon Calamari and the Quarren of Dak in the Outer Rim, who had developed their own hyperdrive centuries earlier and conquered the surrounding planets in their immediate vicinity. Though the Mon Calamari would never officially join the Republic, they remained staunch allies until its fall. By 4100 BBY, the miracle chemical known as Bacta was invented on the Inner Rim world of Thyfera, and instantaneously became one of the most valuable medical commodities on the galactic market, as its ability to heal even the most severe wounds made it a must-have for galactic armies for the rest of galactic history. However, it would take another several millennia for Bacta to become cheap enough to be mass-produced, and only the wealthiest could get their hands on it. A similar substance, Colto, though not as effective as Bacta, was already mass-produced by the Selkath on Manaan, and would remain a medical mainstay before being slowly phased out by Bacta. In 4015 BBY, a first-generation assassin droid, HK-01, instigated and led the Great Droid Revolution on Coruscant, where everything from protocol droids and servant droids to even the lonely cleaning droid rose up against their organic masters. Luckily, the Uprising was put down by the Jedi, and as a result of this conflict, droid manufacturers began taking greater precautions when programming new generations of droids, to ensure that the incident could never happen again. Circa 4000 BBY, the Republic came into contact with the aforementioned Onderon system, and Jedi Knights Taut Donita and brothers Ulic and Qel-droma were tasked with overseeing the system's transition into the Republic. Together, they uncovered the true intentions of Queen Aminoa, one of the last surviving relatives of Freedon Nadd, and aided her daughter, Princess Scalia, in uniting the warring factions of Onderon, ending the Beast Wars and the legacy of Freedon Nadd's stranglehold over the world. 2 years later, the Jedi put down a revolt on Onderon led by the supporters of Freedon Nadd's legacy. Calling themselves the Naddists, they were led by the decrepit King Omen, who had been in hiding for years and was possessed by the spirit of Freedon Nadd himself. Jedi Master Arca Jeth and Ulic Qel-droma managed to defeat the dark-side-empowered king, bringing an end to the Naddist revolt. Freedon Nadd's sarcophagus was later removed from Iziz and relocated to Onderon's moon, Duxon, where it would be entombed behind slabs of Mandalorian iron. Around 3997 BBY, in the Empress Teta system, which had since been renamed from the Koros system, two rich, spoiled, and bored cousins, Alima and Satal Keto, began delving into Sith sorcery after stealing an ancient Sith tome from a museum on Coruscant. Together, they gathered followers enamored by their newfound Sith powers, calling their organization the Krath, and staging a successful coup. The Empress Teta system was now in the hands of the Krath. The Republic responded immediately by sending a Jedi-led task force to regain control of Empress Teta. They failed, however, when Alima Keto's Sith techniques allowed her to conjure hallucinations of giant space grazers in the way of the Republic fleet, bolstering the Krath forces and routing the Republic. Following a Krath counterattack on a Jedi assembly at Daniba, Ulic Qel-droma volunteered to infiltrate the Krath and destroy their organization from the inside. However, things didn't go exactly to plan, and he was seduced by Alima Keto, who injected him with a mind-altering poison. Ulic had become Alima's lover and was made to serve as a general in the Krath military. Jedi Knights Nomi Sunrider, Taut Donita, and Qel-droma led an unsuccessful rescue mission to reclaim Ulic from the Krath, which saw Nomi Sunrider's brief imprisonment and escape, and the death of Satal Keto by Ulic, furthering his position within the Krath. Meanwhile, on Dantooine, a young Jedi named Exar Kun had been training with his master, Vodo Siosk Boss. Kun was always seeking knowledge to better himself as a Jedi and to become the most powerful Jedi ever, and believed that he was being held back by not being allowed to explore some of the darker facets of the Force, and when he accidentally discovered his master's holocron on the Freedon Nadd Uprising, he abandoned his master and set out to learn more. His search for elusive Sith knowledge led him to Onderon, then to Duxon, where he encountered the spirit of Freedon Nadd, who instructed him to go to the Valley of the Dark Lords on Korriban, where a near-death experience allowed Exar to open himself fully to the dark side and embrace its power. Freedon Nadd's teachings led him to Yavin 4, where Exar encountered the Massassi, and he subjugated them using his new dark side abilities, commanding them to build new temples and uncover Naga Sadow's ancient flagship. Exar Kun's reborn Sith Empire was well on its way. Now he sought for other dark side users to do his bidding, and reaching out with the Force, he was able to feel the presence of Alima Keto and Ulic Qel-droma on Empress Teta. Kun traveled to Empress Teta with his Massassi and challenged Qel-droma, and their clash was so ferocious that the Sith amulets they both wore summoned the spirit of Marka Ragnos, who commanded that they stop fighting and join forces to bring about the next Sith Golden Age. The new Dark Lords of the Sith obeyed and turned their combined forces against the Republic. The Great Sith War was about to commence. While Exar Kun left for the Jedi Library on Ossus to steal a holocron as well as some Jedi converts, Manda-LORE the Indomitable, leader of the Mandalorians, who had been on a crusade, raiding and conquering a multitude of systems in the core worlds at the time, set the Empress Teta system in his sights. After facing off in a head-to-head duel with Ulic Qel-droma, Manda-LORE the Indomitable was, well, for lack of a better term, dominated by Ulic, and instead of killing the Manda-LORE and ending his shame, he forged an alliance between the Krath and the Mandalorians. Ulic, the Manda-LORE, and Alima took their forces and raided the Republic shipyards at Forast, dealing a severe blow to the Republic's war effort and making off with 300 newly completed warships. Despite Exar Kun's commands to hold his position, Ulic foolishly took his new warships and attempted to overrun Coruscant, and after a tempestuous battle, Ulic was captured, Alima escaped, and Manda-LORE fled to Yavin 4 to rally Exar Kun. In the Senate Hall, a trial for Ulic Qel-droma was held, not before Exar Kun strode in, flanked by Manda-LORE the Indomitable and dozens of Massassi warriors. And while the Massassi dealt with the Jedi, Exar Kun dueled and killed his former master, as well as Supreme Chancellor Sidrona. With Ulic in hand, they withdrew to Yavin 4. The next stage of Exar Kun's plan would go off without a hitch. Alima Keto's flagship awaited in the Kron cluster to draw in Republic forces. Unbeknownst to her, the trap she was supposed to set for the Republic was also set for herself, and her flagship's explosion set off a chain reaction, causing the Kron cluster to go supernova. With the blast wave from the Kron cluster headed straight towards Ossus, Exar Kun and Ulic Qel-droma had limited time to raid the Jedi Library. While the Jedi frantically tried to evacuate Ossus, Exar Kun and his Massassi made off with as many artifacts as they could before Qel-droma intervened. Qel-droma pleaded to his brother for him to see sense and come back to the light side. But, blinded by his rage and clouded by the dark side, Ulic engaged Kay in a lightsaber duel, which resulted in Ulic killing his brother. It was only after holding his dead brother in his arms that Ulic realized the full repercussions of his actions, and as Exar Kun abandoned him to die on the Jedi Library world, Nomi Sunrider captured Ulic, and they got off-world before Ossus was devastated by the blast wave. Now in Jedi custody, a repentant Ulic Qel-droma was stripped of his ability to connect with the Force, and revealed the whereabouts of Exar Kun, and a team of Jedi was sent to root him out. Expecting this, Exar Kun began a ritual to immortalize himself. However, he could not complete it before the Jedi arrived, and they managed to imprison Exar Kun's spirit within the Massassi Temple, ending his short-lived reign as Dark Lord of the Sith. Meanwhile, Manda-LORE the Indomitable was tasked to invade Onderon. He got more than he bargained for, however, as the Onderonian Defense Force was more than able to hold back the Mandalorian onslaught, and they retreated to the moon of Duxon, where Manda-LORE the Indomitable fell. Another warrior would find and don Manda-LORE's mask, becoming the next Manda-LORE. In 3995 BBY, the Great Hunt begins, where the Jedi Order began to track down and eradicate the monstrous Sith Tyranitataks, beasts that were created by Exar Kun's Sith sorcery. The last of these great Tyranitataks was believed to have been dealt with in 3993 BBY, though Tyranitataks would remain a prevalent Sith war beast in later years. By 3986 BBY, the once great Jedi Ulic Qel-droma had exiled himself to the frozen wasteland of Ren-Var. There he chose to live out his days in repentance for the lives he took during the Great Sith War, and even had a chance for redemption at one point, tutoring Vima Sunrider, daughter of Nomi Sunrider, for a time. The Cathar Jedi Knight Slyvar tracked Ulic down to Renvar and intended to make him pay for the death of her mate, Credo, as well as her friends who died during the Great Sith War. After an intense lightsaber duel and talking things out with Nomi and Vima, Slyvar managed to overcome her lust for revenge and forgive Ulic for his crimes. However, a spacer named Hogan, who had helped Slyvar track Ulic down, shot Qel-droma in the back, ending the once great legacy of the washed-up Jedi hero. 3,978 years before the Battle of Yavin, Manda-LORE the Ultimate, successor to Manda-LORE the Indomitable, began bolstering the ranks of the Mandalorian clans, as he was eager to continue the Mandalorian legacy of conquest by launching another great crusade, perhaps the largest Mandalorian crusade the galaxy would ever see. In doing this, Manda-LORE the Ultimate brought great changes to the Mandalorian culture as well as their way of life. No longer would they be exclusively Tong, but permitted others to join in their ranks, which allowed their numbers to swell. He also founded an elite warrior caste known as the Neo-Crusaders, distinguished by their color-coded uniformed armor. It was at this time that Sith emissaries from the reclusive Sith Empire in hiding began talks with Manda-LORE the Ultimate, and plans for his Grand Crusade, backed secretly by the Sith, were now underway, and in 2 years' time, the entire galaxy would feel the Mandalorians' might. However, that is a topic for another transmission. This ends my findings on the mid to later periods of the Old Republic. Stay tuned for the next transmission of this lecture series, where the decline of the Old Republic will be discussed. Special thanks to my Oriramakad tier patrons, Batterai, Bowfix, Bonkers, Cherryman, DialSoap130, Hawk2274, Ian Waller, Jaleel, John Hollingsworth, Cal Scarata, Kyankir, Lieutenant Maverick 2, Noah Shane 45, Matt Patton, Mayo 4, The Commando Droid, Scruffy Looking Nerf Herder, Weston Simmons, Wirefox Terrier, Zim the Despot, and Zexend. If you'd like to support this channel, please visit my Patreon, where you can gain access to the official Manda-LORE Discord and other perks. Or if you want to make a one-time donation, buy me a calf on Ko-Fi. Links are in the description. In the meantime, keep your comm channels open for future transmissions, and don't forget to subscribe. Tad Larkin, out.